The leak did not begin with a shout, a public scandal, or a palace announcement. It began behind a closed door, in the kind of private royal meeting where history is usually softened before anyone outside the room ever hears it. But this time, nothing stayed buried. Charles and Camilla's last private meeting became the moment the palace could no longer pretend that loyalty, power, and marriage were still moving in the same direction. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had arrived at Clarence House after weeks of pressure, and Clarence House, one of the royal residences closely tied to his private life, suddenly felt less like a home and more like the place where a painful decision had to be delivered. Camilla knew something was wrong before the king spoke, because the usual warmth had disappeared from his voice. He did not begin with comfort, he began with duty. The queen consort, meaning the wife of the reigning king who holds royal status but does not rule in her own right, sat across from him as he explained that her private advisory role over family access, ceremonial guest lists, and internal household briefings was ending immediately. Those household briefings were the quiet planning notes that shaped who entered royal rooms, who stood beside whom, and who carried influence before the public ever saw a decision. From now on, William and Catherine would be consulted directly on future-facing family matters, and the message was unmistakable. The next reign would no longer be filtered through Camilla's private reach. Camilla did not move at first. She absorbed the words as if each one had landed separately, then asked whether he was speaking as her husband or as the king. Charles placed one hand on the table, struggling with the answer because the crown, the symbol of royal duty and authority, had pushed him past the comfort of marriage. He told her the monarchy had left him no choice. That was the sentence that changed the air. A senior aide outside the room later described in a documented palace account that the silence after those words was so long, it felt like the meeting had stopped breathing. Camilla understood then that this was not a warning, not a pause, not a temporary punishment. It was a formal turning point. Charles had not only taken away access, he had redrawn the emotional border between wife, advisor, and royal authority. And what leaked from that room was only the first crack in a much deeper fracture. But before the palace could understand what Charles had taken away from Camilla, it had to confront what each person in that room believed they were losing. For Charles, the meeting was not simply about removing influence. It was about choosing between a private bond and a public duty that had followed him all his life. For Camilla, it was not merely a loss of access. It felt like the final proof that after years of standing beside the throne, the palace still saw her position as conditional, fragile, and easily withdrawn when the pressure became too great. Charles looked tired before he even spoke, and that exhaustion made the room feel heavier than anger ever could. Camilla watched him closely, searching for the softness she knew, but the king kept returning to the same hard truth. The family could not survive another quiet battle over who shaped decisions before they reached the public. The monarch, meaning the reigning royal who carries final public duty for the crown, had been trapped between loyalty to his wife and pressure from William, senior aides, and palace advisors who wanted internal authority reset before the next reign drew closer. Those palace advisors were trusted officials who helped manage royal decisions behind closed doors, and their concern was simple but dangerous. Private influence had begun to look like power. Camilla felt that accusation before Charles said it clearly. She had spent years building her place through quiet counsel, careful conversations, and household relationships that gave her voice weight when official titles could not. Now those same relationships were being treated like a risk. Charles did not accuse her with cruelty. He did something worse. He spoke with sadness, as if the decision had already hurt him before it reached her. Camilla's pain sharpened when she realized the meeting had been shaped before she entered the room. This was not a request. It was not a warning. It was a decision, already carried through private channels. When Charles mentioned future stability, she understood the phrase at once. Future stability meant protecting the next reign, the coming royal era built around William as heir and Catherine as the steady public center beside him. William's name did not need to be spoken directly for the Queen Consort to feel his presence in the room. Catherine's involvement became the quieter shock. Camilla understood that the Princess of Wales was no longer being treated as a graceful figure at ceremonies, but as part of the monarchy's future structure. In a documented palace account, one aide later revealed that Camilla's face changed at that moment, not with rage first, but with recognition. Charles had not simply stepped back from her, he had stepped toward them. And the answer led back to one earlier moment that palace insiders would later describe as the spark Charles could no longer ignore. The last private meeting did not appear out of nowhere. It was born from a single evening at Windsor, when one carefully arranged family dinner collapsed into cold silence. That night became the point of no return. A seating plan, a delayed toast, and one sharp exchange between Camilla and William turned quiet discomfort into a royal crisis that Charles could no longer smooth over with patience or private assurances. The Windsor Unity dinner had been arranged as a show of calm after months of family strain, and Windsor, one of the royal family's most important residences, carried the kind of history that made every gesture feel heavier. Charles wanted the evening to prove that the family could still gather without tension breaking through. Camilla wanted the room to respect the place she believed she had earned. William wanted Catherine treated not as an afterthought, but as the woman standing beside the future of the crown. Catherine understood the danger before anyone said it aloud. The anniversary calendar, meaning the planned list of royal events marking major public moments for the monarchy, was waiting to be finalized, and the dinner was meant to settle who would appear, who would lead, and who would be seen closest to Charles in the months ahead. That was why the seating plan mattered. It was not just chairs around a table, it was rank, respect, and the quiet language of power. William became visibly tense when he learned Catherine had been moved farther down the informal family order at Camilla's request. The prince did not explode. He did something colder. He stopped speaking. Catherine stayed composed, but her silence unsettled Charles more than open anger would have, because the Princess of Wales rarely allowed private hurt to enter public family moments. Then Camilla corrected an aide in front of everyone, and said future royal appearances should reflect experience before expectation. The Queen Consort meant the words as authority, but William heard them as a direct slight against Catherine and against the next reign itself. Charles watched the prince set down his glass without finishing the toast, and the king understood what that gesture meant. His son was not simply offended, he was withdrawing trust. In a documented palace account, one senior staff member later revealed that Charles barely spoke for several minutes after that moment, as if he had seen the future pulling away from him across the table. Camilla sensed William's anger, but she did not retreat. Catherine sensed Charles's worry, but she did not rescue him. By the end of that dinner, the room had changed. Afterward, William demanded a private clarification from Charles, and the pressure moved from family discomfort into royal command. What began as a dinner table insult soon became a confrontation that no palace aide could soften, delay, or hide. By the time Charles and Camilla faced each other in private, both already knew the meeting would not end gently. There were no aides at the table, no secretaries guiding the language, and no public smiles to hide behind. Only a king who had decided the monarchy needed a reset, and a queen consort who believed that reset had been designed to erase her from the center of power. Charles had requested the private sitting room himself, and he had made one thing clear before Camilla arrived: no interruptions, no extra papers, no one stepping in to soften the words. A sealed folder rested near him, and that folder, a closed set of internal notes prepared for the monarch's decision, carried more weight than any argument. Camilla entered expecting negotiation. She believed there would be room to defend herself, to explain that her influence had been earned through loyalty, patience, and years of standing beside the king when others doubted her place. But Charles had already crossed the line from discussion into command. The king told her the family could not move forward while private influence was being confused with royal authority, meaning the official power to shape royal duties, access, and public order. Camilla heard the phrase as a judgment. She asked whether William had forced this. Charles did not answer directly, and that silence wounded her more deeply than a yes ever could. The queen consort understood what silence meant in royal rooms. It meant the decision had already traveled through other hands. It meant William had not shouted, but his position had carried force. Camilla pushed back sharply, saying Catherine was being elevated too quickly, and the words changed Charles's face. Catherine, as the Princess of Wales, held the role of the future queen beside William, and that title now meant more than ceremony. It meant preparation. It meant stability. It meant the palace was looking beyond the present marriage and toward the next reign. Charles closed the folder with a final movement that ended the argument before it could grow louder. In a documented palace account, a senior aide later revealed that no raised voice came from the room after that moment. Only a silence, so hard it made the corridor freeze. Then Charles removed his reading glasses, set them beside the folder, and told Camilla the decision would stand, even if it broke the room. Camilla stared at him, not as a wife hearing difficult news, but as a woman realizing the center had moved without her. And once that door opened, the palace machinery began moving faster than she expected. But the real power behind Charles's decision was not only emotional, it was hidden inside the structure of the monarchy itself. Behind the private pain stood a colder reality. The crown does not survive on affection alone. It survives on order, succession, discipline, and the careful management of who speaks, who decides, and who stands closest to the future. Charles may have delivered the decision, but the force behind it came from a widening circle of advisors who believed the monarchy could not afford another private power struggle. Charles read the confidential internal summary alone, and every line made the choice feel less like a family matter and more like a royal emergency. The crown, meaning the institution of monarchy and the authority carried by the sovereign, demanded control before private tensions spilled into public damage. Senior courtiers, the experienced palace officials who guide royal operations behind the scenes, had warned that informal influence was creating confusion around guest lists, palace briefings, and ceremonial priorities. Those priorities mattered because ceremonies are not just events. They show the public who holds trust, who stands near power, and who represents the future. William's role was becoming central in those discussions. Advisors argued that the next reign had to be protected before cracks appeared in front of the country, and the prince's position could no longer be treated as something waiting quietly in the distance. Charles stopped when he saw Camilla's name beside the phrase authority overlap. The king looked pained, not because the words surprised him, but because they made private loyalty sound like an administrative problem. A trusted courtier later revealed in a documented palace account that Charles paused for several seconds, as though the page had stopped being a report and become a judgment on his marriage. Camilla was not in the room, yet she filled it. Her influence had reached dinners, briefings, guest decisions, and the delicate rhythm of who received access first. The queen consort had built that place slowly, but the folder now described it as a risk to order. The new internal boundary was direct. Camilla would remain publicly honored, but private operational control would move through Charles, William, and approved household channels. Household channels meant the formal offices that manage royal schedules, access, and communication, keeping personal preference separate from official command. Catherine's name appeared in the future-facing section, and that detail carried quiet force. The Princess of Wales was being protected as part of long-term stability, not merely praised as a popular figure. Charles understood what that meant. William's future was no longer theory. Catherine's place was no longer decorative. Camilla's reach was no longer safe. When she learned the decision had been written into palace procedure, shock turned colder than anger. The moment the decision became procedure, the fallout stopped being private and began spreading through every corridor that Camilla once thought she understood. The first morning after the meeting carried no public drama, yet inside the palace it felt like a storm had passed through locked rooms. No announcement was made. No statement was released. But Camilla knew. The rhythm around her had changed. The familiar calls slowed. The usual papers did not arrive. and for the first time, she felt the machinery of the monarchy moving without waiting for her hand. Camilla sat alone with untouched tea, waiting for the morning briefing that had always reached her desk before the household fully stirred. The morning briefing, meaning the daily set of private notes that guides royal schedules, access, and sensitive family planning, mattered because it showed who was trusted before decisions became visible. This time, it did not come. An aide entered with careful politeness and explained that certain internal planning notes related to ceremonial access and future family scheduling had been redirected through the king's private office. The king's private office was the close team that manages Charles's most sensitive decisions, and its control meant the change was not casual. It was official. Camilla listened without raising her voice, but the queen consort understood every word beneath the words. Palace staff behaved with exaggerated gentleness, and that made the humiliation sharper. No one was cruel. No one needed to be. Their soft voices told her they already knew she had been moved outside the inner rhythm. Her anger rose first, hot and immediate, because she had spent years building influence through patience, survival, and constant presence beside Charles. Then anger gave way to sadness. The shift was not temporary. It was not emotional. It was not a moment the king would undo after guilt settled in. It was operational, written into how the monarchy would now move. Camilla expected a call from Charles that morning, even a brief one, even a careful sentence to prove the marriage had not been swallowed by the decision. The call never came. In a documented palace account, one aide later revealed that the queen consort looked toward the phone several times, then stopped, as if she had accepted the silence before anyone explained it. William received a separate briefing the same day, and the prince's careful silence told senior staff he understood the scale of what had changed. He did not celebrate. He did not soften it either. The future king knew the boundary had finally been drawn. Camilla felt the palace moving around her, and Charles allowed that movement to settle without rescue. Yet the turning point would not come through staff, procedure, or briefing papers. Because once the palace had moved around Camilla, Charles still had to face William without the protection of titles, advisors, or carefully chosen words. The most important conversation after the leak did not happen in a council room. It did not involve courtiers, files, or official language. It happened between Charles and William, in a private space where neither man could hide behind ceremony. For once, the question was not who had won. It was whether a father and son could admit that saving the monarchy had cost them both something deeply personal. Charles faced William after the household changes had already begun, and the quiet between them carried more weight than any formal statement. The king knew his son had not come to celebrate Camilla's removal from influence. William wanted to know whether his father truly accepted what had been done, or whether guilt would slowly pull the old structure back into place. A private meeting, meaning a closed conversation with no aides, records, or official witnesses guiding the words, mattered because it stripped both men of protection. Charles could not speak as a distant monarch only. William could not speak as the future king only. They had to speak as father and son, with the crown standing between them like a burden neither had chosen lightly. Charles admitted that duty had become heavier with age. The king did not defend himself. He simply said, the older he became, the more every decision seemed to wound someone he loved. William softened when he heard that, because the prince saw exhaustion instead of resistance. He had expected caution. He had prepared for excuses. Instead, he found a man who had finally understood that delay had a cost. William then admitted that Catherine had felt sidelined at Windsor, but he chose each word carefully, refusing to turn her pain into accusation. Catherine, as the Princess of Wales, represented the next public chapter of the monarchy, and her treatment mattered because the public already looked to her as a sign of stability. Charles listened without interruption. In a recorded private account later described by a senior household source, the king confirmed that Camilla would retain dignity in public, but her private reach would not be restored. That sentence settled the room. William did not smile. He only nodded, because this was not victory. This was damage control after years of blurred lines. Then the prince said the future could not be built on private resentments. Charles nodded without defending the past, and that became the turning point. The father had accepted what the monarch had ordered. The son had accepted that mercy and firmness would have to live side by side. That quiet agreement set the stage for the leak to become public, where the monarchy would have to absorb judgment from the outside world. And when the story broke beyond palace walls, the private meeting became a national symbol of power, marriage, and the price of survival. When the leak reached the public, it did not feel like another royal rumor. It felt like a curtain being pulled back on the emotional cost of the crown. The country saw not just a palace adjustment, but a marriage under strain, a future king stepping closer, and a queen consort discovering that public rank could not protect private influence once the monarchy decided to defend itself. Charles watched the coverage in silence, and the silence around him felt almost as heavy as the silence after his meeting with Camilla. The crown, meaning the monarchy as an institution and the duty carried by the sovereign, had survived storms before, but this one was different because it touched marriage, succession, and trust at the same time. The media did not frame the leak as a small private disagreement. They framed it as a defining moment in the king's reign, the point where Charles had chosen future order over private comfort. Camilla saw her role debated across the country, and the queen consort felt exposed by a decision she had never been allowed to explain in her own words. Her public title still remained, but the private reach behind that title had been stripped away, and that contrast made the humiliation sharper. Charles knew the palace response had to be controlled. The official line was brief, cold, and careful. Internal household arrangements remained a matter for the king. Internal household arrangements meant the private system of offices, briefings, access, and planning that shapes royal life before the public sees anything. That short statement told the country almost nothing, yet it confirmed everything. One London newspaper ran a stark front page showing Clarence House behind black iron gates with the headline, "The Meeting That Ended Her Inner Circle." Clarence House, the royal residence closely tied to Charles and Camilla's private world, suddenly became the symbol of a closed door that had changed the monarchy's direction. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered near the railings as a broadcaster described the leak as the clearest sign yet that the next reign is already shaping the present one. Buckingham Palace, the working center of the monarchy, mattered because public feeling often gathers there when the country senses royal history shifting. In a recorded broadcast segment, the presenter said the story was no longer only about Camilla's influence, but about William's future and Catherine's quiet rise. Charles heard that line later and did not react. Camilla heard it too, and she understood that the country had finally seen the boundary drawn around her. Public reaction forced the monarchy to settle the meaning of the meeting, not through another statement, but through how each person carried themselves afterward. The world had reacted. The palace had absorbed the shock, and now only one question remained. What did that closed-door meeting truly mean? In the end, the last private meeting between Charles and Camilla was not remembered because of a raised voice or a single brutal sentence. It mattered because it revealed the truth beneath the velvet surface of monarchy. Love can stand beside power, but it cannot always command it. Charles chose the crown's future over Camilla's private reach, and that choice changed the emotional map of the royal family. The king carried the decision with visible sadness, because he knew he had protected the monarchy by wounding the person closest to him. Camilla remained publicly honored, but the queen consort understood the deeper truth. Her private advisory influence over access, briefings, and ceremonial direction had ended. The crown, meaning the institution of monarchy, and the duty attached to royal authority, had drawn a line that marriage could not cross. That mattered because public continuity still had to be protected, even while private trust had been broken behind closed doors. The monarchy showed calm on the outside, but inside, authority had quietly reorganized around Charles, William, and the future-facing household structure. That structure meant the team and decisions shaping the next chapter of royal life, especially the roles that would guide the family after Charles. William emerged from the crisis not as a rebel son, but as the figure whose future forced the present to become disciplined. The prince did not need to seize control. His place in the line of succession, the order that decides who becomes monarch next, gave his concerns a weight no one could ignore. Catherine's quiet elevation became the hidden emotional consequence of the meeting. The Princess of Wales was no longer simply a beloved public figure. She was being protected as part of the monarchy's long-term stability. Camilla's final position was not defeat alone. It was isolation. Rank remained. Appearances remained. But trust and influence had been withdrawn, and that loss cut deeper than any public statement ever could. In a documented palace account, one senior source revealed that Charles later described the decision as necessary, but not painless, and those words captured the whole tragedy. The king had been strengthened as a monarch, yet diminished as a husband. Camilla had been wounded, yet left visible. William and Catherine stood closer to the center, yet their rise came through private suffering rather than celebration. The meeting meant the monarchy had chosen order over intimacy, succession over sentiment, and survival over private loyalty. That was the true verdict of the leaked meeting. Not the end of a royal marriage, but the end of Camilla's private command over the future of the crown. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.